All right. How's it going, everybody? Todd here. Welcome to season 2 of Understanding the Times. And I'm really excited to share this podcast tonight with everyone watching out here on Facebook and YouTube and wherever else you might find this. So tonight's episode is going to be a little bit different. I was hoping to do a live stream like I typically do on Thursday nights, but I remembered that I had an amazing invitation to join a good friend of mine over in Tulsa, Jerusalem, at his Order of Melchizedek gathering of several kings and other leaders, business guys, entrepreneurs, faith leaders in the area. And he's cooking up an amazing meal for us, and I couldn't miss it. So unfortunately, this won't be live, but I'm recording it ahead of time. I'm going to release it. And it actually worked out great because the podcast I'm going to share is just amazing. This is a guy that has been extremely influential in my life. And let me stop this music. He has written several books I have on the shelf over there that have helped me gain a better understanding of the Bible. In fact, let me see if I have that one handy. Yeah. Right here. This book right here, I can't recommend it enough. Understanding the Whole Bible, the King, the Kingdom, and the New Covenant, which is what this podcast is all about. Dr. Jonathan Welton, he's amazing. He's become just an incredible hero in my life and just an amazing guy. He's kind of been quiet over the last several years. He's been taking care of family stuff. He moved from New York to his new home in South Carolina. And so he's kind of emerging back on the scene. And I'm so glad because the Holy Spirit has just given him some incredible revelation. He's put in the work to study the Bible and written some great books. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and introduce you to Jesska Layne, who has an incredible podcast you need to check out and go subscribe to. It's called Alice in No Man's Land, especially for women. It's fantastic. She'll tell you more about that, but even men can gain a lot from what she shares and what a lot of the guests that she shares has to offer. So without further ado, I'm going to jump out of here and you guys enjoy this incredible live stream with Dr. Jonathan Welton. Here we go.
Okay. Welcome, Dr. Jonathan Welton. Thank you so much for coming on today. We've got some big questions for you, and I'm excited to just jump right in.
It's a pleasure to be back. Good to be with you. And I think we're going to have some fun today.
Excellent. Yeah, never know where these answers are going to go. So I am always excited. All right. The very first question, I'm going to pre-frame it a bit. We're talking about how to understand this moment in time. A lot of people would agree we're in interesting times. There's a lot going on. Our news feeds are constantly full of all kinds of stuff that can be challenging, hard to make sense of. So we're looking for your perspective, your story. What is going on right now?
Wow, what a big open-ended question. Where to begin? I suppose one of the things I'm really known for is a system of understanding the Bible called Better Covenant Theology. And it's the foundation of my worldview. It's the foundation of however I would answer a question like that. We could zero into just this year. It's 2024. Here's where we're at. But to build that house of where we're at and where we're going, I would start here with my perspective, the Judeo-Christian worldview perspective that I come from is Better Covenant Theology. And I have my doctorate in theology. I've really focused on wanting to understand the Bible. Because I hear people so often having confusion or just believing it cannot be understood or it's irrelevant or it's full of contradictions. There's a lot of these popular statements that people make. I don't think any of that is true. I think it's extremely relevant. I think it's very important to guide our lives. I don't believe there are contradictions in it. I believe there's a right way to understand it and in context that it makes sense. So some of my presuppositions are quite different than even other Christians. So one of the things that most Christians fall into two camps. There's a system of reading the Bible called dispensationalism. Inside of dispensational thinking, I think it was summed up well by a preacher I heard one time who said, "What is the most important page in the Bible?" And everybody was curious, stumped, and he flipped to the blank piece of paper, and he said, "The blank piece of paper between the Old and New Testament is the most important page in the Bible."
Mm.
That is a summary of Christians who fall into dispensationalism. Dispensationalism draws a hard line between the Old Testament and the New Testament. They call law versus grace. Inside of that system, you essentially see the Old Testament as the Old Covenant, and it is no longer relevant, no longer applicable. It's something you leave behind. Then the other system that exists inside of Christianity is covenant theology. Covenant theology sees very little barrier between the Old and the New Testament. Their very little barrier, they would say that Jesus replaced the lamb and animal sacrifice system of the Old Testament, but the rest of the laws are still applicable. So you carry over most of the laws. So you have these two camps inside of Christianity, one that carries over a lot of laws, covenant theology, and one that draws a massive wall between the Old and the New Testament. That's dispensationalism. I see some fundamental problems in both. And so that's where a lot of these contradictions come from that people run into. So for me, I went back and looked at the ancient covenants in the Bible and how they progressively build and how they are different. There's essentially, if you want to simply understand the Bible, you have to understand the covenants because it's the written record of God's covenant journey with mankind. That's what the Bible is, the written record of God's covenant journey with mankind. We have the story of Noah, who has a covenant with God and floods the whole earth, and he puts the covenant there saying, "I'll never do that again." And he puts the rainbow in the sky. You move forward, you have Abraham. He promises he's going to make a great people and a great nation out of him, which are the Jewish people. And he makes a covenant with Abraham. Later, he makes a covenant with Moses, and that creates the nation of Israel and their temple system, their tabernacle system, and all the laws. Then later, he makes a covenant with David, King David. And then later, he makes a covenant with Jesus, and that's in the New Testament. If you want to understand the Bible, you have to understand those five covenants. When you understand those five covenants and how they progressed, you start to understand where we are in world history, because those covenants, they progressed, and the Mosaic covenant, the covenant God made with Moses, he tells Moses at the end of Deuteronomy, ultimately, this covenant will fail. Your people will go worship other gods. They will be led into exile. Then I will draw their heart back. They'll come back to Jerusalem. They'll rebuild. And then I will make a new covenant by circumcising their hearts. And when he predicts this, he basically tells us at the end of Deuteronomy the story of the whole rest of the Bible. He says, "You're going to walk away from me," which they do. They worship other gods. They especially do that under King Solomon. King Solomon, who's married to over 1,000 women, wives and concubines. He ends up leading the nation into decline, and they worship other gods. The nation divides into northern and southern Israel, and you have them get led off into captivity under Babylon. Then you have the books of Daniel, Esther, all of those. So then they repent, they come back to Israel, they rebuild. That's Ezra and Nehemiah. Then Jesus comes and he circumcises the heart. He gives us a new heart. He makes us righteous. He builds a new covenant. And that's the new covenant story. When you understand that progression, one of the things about the Mosaic covenant is that it was destroyed in the first century when the temple was destroyed. Now, a lot of people miss this because Jesus on the cross in 30 AD, he creates a new covenant. But the old covenant of Moses lasted until 70 AD when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. So the whole New Testament is written in a background of a war between the new covenant and the old covenant that are in conflict with each other. Now, why is all of this important, John? And why are you taking us down this whole history lesson? I feel like Vladimir Putin sitting with Tucker Carlson right now, you know? Like we're going back to 800 AD and some bizarre Russian prince, right? Some people will get that reference, other people maybe not. But the concept here, why this is important, is because most modern Christians, not knowing this history, they pick up things like the whole book of Revelation or other prophecies like in Matthew 24, where Jesus is declaring the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, and they throw that into our future. And so they're afraid of it as our future, when Deuteronomy is actually telling us this is going to be what happens at the end of the old covenant. When the old covenant system is being annihilated, this will take place. And in the book of Revelation, which is the story of visionary story of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in the first century, we have the exact picture of the old covenant being destroyed. Now, it's amazing when you start to line that in the book of Revelation, it quotes from Deuteronomy. It quotes a thing called the Song of Moses, which is all about the judgment that would come on Jerusalem, would come on the Jewish people for falling away and not following the Lord. We have in the book of Revelation, if you put it side by side with the book of Ezekiel, the pictures are just incredibly identical. The bowls and the scrolls and the wrath and the declarations, there's countless parallels. Ezekiel was predicting the destruction of Jerusalem under the Babylonians, which happened in 586 BC. And it happened on a specific day called the 9th of Av. When the Romans came in and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, they did it on the 9th of Av. It's crazy. The parallels between Ezekiel declaring judgment on Jerusalem and the Apostle John declaring judgment on Jerusalem in the book of Revelation are just mind-blowing. And once you understand that, it actually frees you from all of these prophecies that modern Christians have picked up and thrown into the future. And they're terrified that we're going to end up having microchips in our hands and mark of the beast. And we're afraid of every bit of technology and everything that's coming, and build your bomb shelter and all of that, because they think it's in the future. When in reality, it's about a covenant shift that was taking place. And that covenant, the covenant God made with Moses, he declared it was going to fail. And he laid out the timeline of how it was going to fail, and that he would come and he'd replace and he'd build a new one. So the whole picture's been there the whole time, which leaves us in a spot of, so where are we in history? Well, we're not anticipating some horrendous, scary future predicted in the Bible. That's not ahead of us. That's way behind us. We're actually in a process of doing what Jesus called advancing the kingdom. In Matthew chapter 13, he gave a few pictures of what the kingdom would be like. He said the kingdom would start small, like a mustard seed. That mustard seed would grow into a bush, and then it would turn into a tree, and that tree would turn into the largest tree in the garden, and it would be a place for birds to come and rest in it. See, the kingdom has been advancing from the cross of Jesus until today. The kingdom has been advancing. We think of ancient civilizations where I think of the Mayans and the Aztecs. One of them in particular had an annual celebration where they would worship this bloodthirsty god. And in this annual thing, they would have human sacrifice, up to 86,000 people being put to death in one celebration, one ceremony every year to this bloodthirsty god. I know that the modern woke movement has gotten in people's heads, oh, these bad colonizers bringing their white religion around the world. But in reality, we're bringing the Middle Eastern religion of Christianity all around the world, bringing peace, bringing safety, removing things like human sacrifice, child sacrifice. Uh, it has brought end to slavery. I mean, William Wilberforce in Great Britain brought an end to slavery without any civil war being necessary. So we've brought tremendous advance into this earth. People seem to take for granted nowadays how peaceful it's been over the last couple decades. I know it's starting to get stirred up again now, but we in the West have taken it for granted and then started blaming Christianity, when in reality, Christianity is what planted all the universities in our country. It's built most of the hospitals in our country. It's ended most of the wars. It's abolished slavery. It stopped human sacrifice and pagan ceremonies and rituals around the world. So the kingdom has been advancing. And simply, when I say the kingdom, people might be like, well, what is the kingdom? Is the kingdom the church? It's a little bit different. The kingdom, Jesus says in Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer. And one of the things he says is that it would be on earth as it is in heaven. Now, is there slavery in heaven? We don't believe so. So there should be no slavery on earth. Is there oppression? Is there inequality between men and women? Is there abuse? Is there sexual abuse? Is there all of these things? No, not in heaven. So there shouldn't be on earth. So the advance of the kingdom is to make earth like heaven. Now, this is actually something where we find ourselves actually in common quite often with the New Agers. I think of Eckhart Tolle and how he wrote a brilliant book, The New Earth, and he draws some pictures that are just incredible for Christians to grasp of what the goal of moving toward harmony and unity and the kingdom and all of that. And I think we actually have some similarity in some ways. A lot of New Agers actually came out of the church, so there's usually a crossover there. Now I've said a lot. Let's pause for a moment. Where would you like to go?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you for that background. It's interesting how many people that have a really developed worldview, when asked a big question, will do exactly what you just did. They'll go back and really provide some context and some history and start detangling the present moment. And that usually goes back pretty far or pretty deep, depending on what the context is. So one of my favorite quotes from probably college was, text without context leads to pretext. So if you just start talking about the moment without putting it into a proper context, we all just put our presuppositions on it because that's what we're all wading in our personal life. So we're all kind of seeping in these different perspectives, these different things that we've either been exposed to, contradictions or not, whatever the situation is, we're all seeping in. So when you really go to explain something, especially if it requires a bit of a shift from the norm, it usually does require going quite a few steps back and being willing to be challenged on the whole way the system was set up, on whatever they believe. It could be organic food versus not organic food. If you listen to anybody talk passionately about food, they're going to be like, okay, so 500 years ago when
Right.
So that sounds pretty on par to take us down that train of thought. And to be fair, this is a huge question. I'm going to throw something else out to you and then pick your brain on that for a sec. So I just want to highlight for a moment one thing that stood out about what you're putting on the table. And so I've read your stuff. I've followed you for a while. I've been challenged by your perspectives. And when it comes to understanding the story, what you're putting out there really highlighted the importance of knowing the story. So for example, let's play with the two big Christian camps of worldview. One might believe that we are headed towards apocalypse and what people call the rapture, or kind of like a world-ending scenario. And our job in that worldview is basically to wait, to kind of hold fast to our own personal values, but we're waiting for a savior to come down, rescue us from, the the garbage fire that is happening, and then we're done. We're saved by our belief, and that's happening. So that would really dictate our behavior if that's the story we believe in. Now, if that's not the story we believe in, and we believe per se that that's not happening, that's not really what the scripture says. In fact, we're supposed to continue long into the future, perhaps making earth as it is supposed to be in heaven. Those two stories would radically dictate different behavior. And that's kind of one of the points of understanding the story and how much that can affect us. And that was a really clear one for me as far as making up my own mind or exploring more about the Christian-Judeo worldview, because depending on what story I believe would really change how I live my life now. So when we come back to this moment in time, there's so much information, and that information is being paired with what I would call basically collective trauma at this point. There's a lot of stuff, whether it's real or not, it's putting people in fear, it's putting them in anxiety. Things are changing so quickly, it's creating basically a sense of unsafeness and just kind of chaos, to a certain degree. And so when you have all this information and these heightened emotions, the stories come pretty clearly to the top, and they can get distorted and they can get extreme. And it can be hard to detangle what is the story, because believing the wrong story at a critical point can really confuse a life, right? We can really get backwards and upside down. Now, in coaching, this happens all the time. We try and put a personal life or a personal situation or even an organizational issue in context, because if we're believing the wrong story about it, we're going to just go all the way in the wrong direction. So I just wanted to highlight, based on what you were saying, how big of a deal that actually can be for a person or even a group of people, what story we believe and how that's going to basically dictate the story moving forward. If we believe everything's going to go up in flames pretty soon, that's going to really change how we behave. So all that to say,
we saw examples of this in the 80s, because there were a lot of Christians who bought into. Hale Lindsey wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. It was one of the first books to sell across Christian lines, because before that, denominations pretty much had their authors. It was one of the first books. It was the first book to cross into all denominations. I believe it was over 30 million copies that were sold, which for the early 70s, that was a shocking amount of books to be sold. And so that book laid out the idea that because Israel had become a nation in 1948, and because of some verses in Matthew 24, where Jesus talks about the fig tree putting out its branches, he took that verse and made it sound to him like Israel becoming a nation again was a fulfillment of prophecy, and that the things Jesus was talking about with 70 AD would actually happen within 40 years. So from 1948 to 1988. So he was saying by 1988, we are in world trouble. And there was a guy who came out and he sold a book called 88 Reasons Jesus Will Return in 1988. Sold 3.5 million copies, and people were literally eating like idiots, just like plowing through food, maxing out their bank accounts, their credit cards, everything they could get their hands on, because Jesus is about to return. So I'm going to party it up. I'm going to bury myself in debt. This rapture is about to get me out of here. I'll float away from all my problems, all my fat, all my sexual relationships I'm going to have, everything. They just went crazy. And people did this in the 80s in the church leading up to this failed prediction. And so we start to see what you believe about these things really has a massive practical impact on your life and how you're going to live. And I think one of the foundational things that I look at, for me politically, I look for my perspective as an American living under the American system of government. For people who are outside of America but still here, I'll say as a United States citizen, people say, well, I'm in America too. Okay, sure. As an American United States citizen, um, I understand that this system only works inside of personal responsibility. That is such a massive key. And Christians miss that. And when we go to vote, we miss that. But it's so important that personal responsibility, which I end up being a libertarian because of that. And it's about personal responsibility. I am accountable for my actions personally, but I don't want to put laws and rules in abundance on everybody else trying to control everybody else. I want everybody to take on that same level of 100% personal responsibility. And the government should step in when somebody's rights are being violated or when somebody's responsibilities are being violated, but there's a very limited role for government. Well, in the same way, when I look at what is my understanding of what we should be currently doing, it's about personal responsibility. I'm not sitting on my hands waiting for an antichrist figure to take over the world and a total hellscape to break loose, and Jesus is going to come with a rescue helicopter to get the few chosen ones. I believe he left us with a personal responsibility to advance the kingdom in the earth.
Mhm.
And at the same time, it can be very convincing to look around and go, well, but doesn't it look like we're headed into really dark times? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not taking any you know, Pollyanna-ish version of everything's fine, everything's okay. No, we are in some really dark moments right now in our history, especially if you go back over the last 4 or 5 decades. Things have been progressively getting better and improving in so many ways.
Mhm.
But between AI, between the debasing of our currency, between you know food production, costs of inflation, all of it. I mean, we are definitely in some dark times, but I don't believe that that is leading up to the end of the planet. I believe we're headed somewhere else. And I'll pause there.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I want to give an illustration of how I see the story, and then I want you to comment and tell us the actual story as you see it.
Mhm.
Okay, so moving it from the situation for a second, let's take the body, for example. I really love health and wellness, and this is another arena where so many people have strong opinions, but let's just say for a second, I've got like a headache coming on and I'm starting to sweat and, I have a little rash and some lumps. Okay, some symptoms are arising. We're not going to deny something's going on here, right? Like trouble is looming. What is this? However, properly diagnosed would radically change, once again, how I understand it. So once we start spanning out, getting this context and having some real intelligent thought applied, I might understand the difference. Is this a reaction to something in my environment? Am I detoxing? Detox is very painful and can look really rough, but it's actually a sign of healing. It's a completely different story than you're actually being poisoned and you need to go to the hospital. And it's this kind of intervention. One is rest and be still, and you're on track. This is how it needs to play out. You're going to be okay. Here's some things to stay calm. And the other one is if you don't act soon, you're going to be in even worse trouble. So go to the hospital. And that's just a small example of how we understand the same group of symptoms can radically determine what happens. And accurately defining that or knowing that story can not only provide so much comfort, but actually a pretty clear way forward. So bringing us back to the moment, we have these symptoms. Like you said, you listed all these things, and everybody in their little corners of the world has even more ideas of what that looks like. There's things we haven't even mentioned that other people are dealing with. So take us into Jonathan Welton's high overview, almost as if you were like explaining it to a group of children. And I'm not demeaning us as an audience, but I really enjoy when people can summarize almost on a story level of, okay, what is this? Are we detoxing and we're on track and we're headed towards health? Or is it time to go to the hospital and radical things need to take place? Or is it something altogether, different? So if you want, play with it. What's the story here? What's happening? And that's going to take us into what's happening next, which is the next big question.
That is such a perfect analogy. And I think people are so scared of the symptoms of the detox right now instead of understanding what's actually happening, that
Mhm.
we're getting some things out of our system, and it will be rocky. You will still sweat the bed, you will still feel terrible, but we're coming through, and I believe we're pretty close to coming out the other side. I think 2024 is going to be, I think we haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
And it's hard for people to grasp, but if I turn back the clock to 2019 and I came to you and said, "Oh, did you know that next year we're going to have the whole world locked down? People are going to be running to the store buying toilet paper as if it's the most important item. People are going to be staying home from their jobs. If you travel to another country, you have to stay in a hotel room for 2 weeks before you can even go out into the other country. You're going to have people sticking Q-tips up your nose every time you go anywhere on a cruise or on a plane or whatever. People will be like, "You're out of your mind. Everybody's gonna be wearing masks." Okay, sure. Put on the tinfoil hat, right? Like
Mhm.
nobody would believe you if I was telling you this in 2018 or 2019. And then we all lived through it.
Right.
And now here we are down the road, and we're we're I believe at the doorstep of some things way crazier than what we've already been through. And it's the next level of this detox. That detox helped us start to understand that the pharmaceutical companies and the health organizations around the world are not to be blindly trusted. That they are filled with liars, filled with people who have agendas, people who are we started trying to trust the science, and then every time we trusted it, we actually ended up following the money, and
Mhm.
woke up and said, "Okay, enough of this BS."
Mhm.
And so, that's been a wake up call for people, but there's a lot more wake up calls coming. Now, big picture, I'm trying to think how far back do we go in this big picture? Because if I went back just a little bit, I love Ron Paul said it, not Rand Paul, his father, Ron Paul, the senator from Texas of 40 something years. He wrote his book, End the Fed, and talked about the Federal Reserve and the problems that it creates for our economy. Uh, and he made the statement that we have been in World War I, World War III since the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Mhm.
People do not understand that humanity, has been at war with the three-letter organizations in our country at least since the assassination of Kennedy. Now, if we go back further, I believe who we're really at war with, and it's easy to say, well, it's the devil. Yes, but the devil has influence in specific people, in specific arenas, in specific realms. Even in the New Testament, Jesus talked about you can serve God or you can serve Mammon. And Mammon was this demon named after the financial currency system. It's a demon behind money.
Mm.
Money's not evil, but it can be the root of all kinds of evil.
Mhm.
And this demonic force that Jesus names, it's one of the main forces we're up against. So if we're to go back, it goes back further than the assassination of Kennedy. You can look at the founding of our country and some of the history that, of course, we're never taught about. We know that 1776, July 4th, they signed the Declaration of Independence. We go to war with England. But then you ask your average person, what was the War of 1812? See, we understand the Revolutionary War was against them for our freedom. We understand that the War of the Civil War was us contending over slavery. We jump forward to World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq. Like we have an understanding of those. If you ask somebody, what was the War of 1812? No idea. It's like this forgotten war. And why is it forgotten? Because it was actually about us breaking into freedom from England once and for all. See, 1776, we won freedom to a degree. And inside of the freedom, we also had to still keep paying England because they still had contracts that no matter that 50% of the gold and silver that we found in this country, we had to pay them. Alexander Hamilton, which we've had Broadway created the Hamilton play, which is very enjoyable, great soundtrack. I really enjoyed it. But it's weird actually to dig into Alexander Hamilton because he was deeply involved in creating the first central bank in the US, and he was close friends with the Rothschild family. Alexander Hamilton is actually a very bad guy for our country. And he basically was at war with Thomas Jefferson, who was trying to get the ear of George Washington, saying, don't listen to him. He's setting up something evil in this country. I've seen it all over Europe. Don't allow this here. Well, somehow Hamilton got away with what he did, and he created the central bank in America. It had a charter that lasted for a period of time from the Revolutionary War up until about 1811. When that charter ran out, that's when America went to war with England. And we had a second fight. We had a second fight to try to break free of being a enslaved debtor nation to England. Even though we'd won a certain measure of freedom, we were still controlled monetarily.
Mhm.
When we broke free of that, we had a period of freedom, and then we started the second central bank. We made the same mistake a little generation later, and that's when Andrew Jackson came in, and President Andrew Jackson, his whole motto was vote for Jackson and no bank. His entire premise to become president was, I will destroy the central bank system in this nation, which he did. He got voted in. He was a populist president, a landslide victory. Sounds familiar, right? He got in and he destroyed the central bank system. And from there, we went into years of prosperity. And that led to, between his presidency and Lincoln, we had years of prosperity. And then the central bank system, the Rothschild-backed system, got us into a civil war. We could have abolished slavery just like England did without a civil war, but there's lots of money to be made inside of a war. And so every war that's been created, the Rothschild family has backed it on both sides, all the way back to Napoleon. This is a way that they produce massive wealth for themselves.
Mhm.
So they get us into the Civil War, take us down again. And by the time we get to 1913, we have the creation of the Federal Reserve. Most people think that's a part of our government. It's actually a private corporate entity. It's completely separate. It is not in our Constitution. It is not a part of our government. The Federal Reserve, even though it's trickily named, is actually just the central bank. If you go to any other country and you look at their bills, it says Central Bank of Canada, Central Bank of China, Central Bank of Brazil. In our country, it says Federal Reserve Note. It's the same thing. It's a separate organization. The problem with this system is if you have a government, they make a contract with a private organization and say, you create our currency, you control the currency. That bank out here then loans the currency to the people, and there's a requirement to pay back that loan. Well, they start charging interest on that. That's what we call inflation.
Mhm.
It creates a system that will ultimately end up failing because you can never actually pay back the central bank, which is essentially a loan shark
Mhm.
who's loaned you this money at a high percent of interest. And what people also don't realize when they hear, oh, inflation's at 2% or 7% or whatever, is that inflation is actually cumulative. So it doesn't go away. It doesn't go back down. If you took from 1913 till now, our inflation would be about 3,000% in America.
Mm.
But what most people hear is 2%, 4%, 7%, which is just the current annual rate of inflation or monthly rate of inflation.
Mhm.
But it actually accumulates. So we have been buried, enslaved in this country into a matrix system that you're born, you're vaccinated, you go to the public education system, you spend 20 years in it until you get your university degree, you're buried in debt, you're eating fast food, your health is being annihilated, they get you into the pharmaceuticals. Oh, you feel depressed? How about you get in a lifetime addiction to this? And we get you farmed. You are human cattle into this whole system. And whatever money you're making, now the government's going to take 30, 40, 50% of it out of you in taxes. And inflation is going to make the money worth less and less. You know, if I gave you $100 bill in 1970 and you tried to use it now, the value of what you could get in 1970 compared to today, 50 years later, is such a dramatic drop for what you could do with that $100 in the 70s to what you can do now.
Mhm.
So just holding your money makes it more and more worthless. So everything in this system is built against us. And the Old Testament talked about this. God actually spoke very harshly against the concept of loaning money with interest, and that it was called usury. And he said, do not do this, it's an evil practice. And so we have in our whole system, the central bank system is the system that is at war with everything and everyone. But they're so behind the scenes, people do not realize. They think, oh, it's Republican versus Democrat, or it's red versus blue, left versus right. We have our propagandized media telling us who to be upset with instead of recognizing what's really behind the whole system is the central bank monopoly that is controlling everything. And people say, well, it's capitalism, it's the lobbyists, it's the corporations. Like everybody's got their favorite thing, but
Mhm.
they do not understand that at the top of this pile is the central bank systems. And you can see how quickly it can change. I'll give you two examples. El Salvador.
Mm.
El Salvador was the most dangerous, highest rate of crime and murder and theft and all of that for years. They got themselves a new president 4 years ago. This individual has paid off the International Monetary Fund. He removed them from having national debt. He removed the central bank in their system. He made Bitcoin their system for buying and making swaps with other countries. He built a super max facility that could house 60,000 prisoners, and he began to round up and remove the MS-13 gangs. El Salvador went from the most dangerous to the most safe country in the world in 4 years under one president. And his main changes were economic changes and crime policy being enforced. Dramatic shift.
Yeah.
Another example would be Javier Milei in Argentina.
Mhm.
They've been under socialism for 15 or so years. He comes in, and in 9 weeks, he produces the first national balanced budget that they've had in 12 years at the point that he did this.
Mhm.
What it was slashing. It was just cutting all of these horrendous spending that the government was doing. And at his rallies to vote him in as president, he would come in with a chainsaw and he would chop stuff up and he'd say, I'm going to cut. I'm just going to
Right.
cut. Just get me in as president. And
Mhm.
he's put that nation on a path for explosive growth. Now, when I say kingdom advancing, most Christian people just think inside of like, I'm going to go tell the gospel to more people. That's awesome. That's good. But that's such a small part of that it would be on earth as it is in heaven.
Mhm.
See, El Salvador has moved from hell on earth to being the most safe nation in the Western world.
Mhm.
This is advancing the kingdom. And we just like, well, God can use whatever leader they put in. And we say these dumb things like that. And it's like, no, if you get the right person in with the right understanding, we can make this place paradise again.
Mhm.
So
Okay. Very cool. Okay, I'm starting to really pick up on the story you're telling here. I'm going to summarize real quick and we're going to slide into that last home run question. Okay, so this is what I'm hearing you say. One, to understand the present, to truly understand big questions, we have to do a little bit of work. And you took us through at the beginning just an example of how far back the present understanding can actually go and all the little misconceptions we can have along the way. So again, to the people who want answers to big questions, those answers usually belong to people who are willing to do the work to expand to those answers. So that was the first thing I got from you, is to have the correct or expanded understanding of what's happening in a time. We might have to do a little bit of work and challenge some conceptions. We might need to look at some history and build out a bigger perspective than just what we're seeing right now. Then I heard you talk a little bit about the two main worldviews, or the two general worldviews inside Christianity. One ending in what you're saying is a misunderstanding, and it goes towards more of apocalyptic turnout versus an advancing kingdom. Now, in the advancing kingdom, you mentioned right away, there's personal responsibility in this worldview. And what we just talked about now, and giving almost a different perspective. So I feel like the first perspective, you really gave us more of a historical and a bit of a spiritual perspective. And then you moved over here to, but it has really practical implications, like personal responsibility, collective responsibility shows up. Like we actually have to clean up the streets. We have to right wrongs. We have to understand where things break down, and we have to go in and fix them. And you gave examples of, on a more collective scale, countries doing this, and how important that actually is, that it's not just spiritual, it's not just historical. There's some dirty work in the middle where it's like, hey, when you see the problems, you have to bring all of this information and knowledge and spirituality to them and fix them. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say so far. Before we move on, how close is that?
awesome summary. Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so yes, the story is building nicely. I see where you see this is going a bit. I see some of the work to get to the understanding of the present. So let's put those two last questions together, because I think you're already building that out for us. What's coming? And let's tie that in with, what do we do about it? What's the individual's role? We know and I think are familiar with the idea of heroes and saviors and even voting. And I'm not saying any of that is wrong or that we don't need those people playing their parts in this time. But if we were to move beyond that a little bit for the individual and their life who might be overwhelmed or curious or just feeling the fire of the symptoms that we talked about arising, what can they expect moving forward? And if it's natural, just tell us a little bit, what do you think that individual role is?
Yeah, if we go back, I think the picture of what we've seen, the power of the president in El Salvador and the president in Argentina to make radical shifts to change a country in a good direction. So I don't want to underestimate that, because a lot of people seem to think, oh, it's just the president. His hands are tied. He's not able to do that much. Actually, he can do a dramatic amount.
Mhm.
And it's very important and vital. So that what we've seen over the last 3 years, I believe, has been a wake-up call to people that elections matter, and leadership, the right leadership in place, really matters. I believe that there is a metaphorical swamp of corrupt individuals, lobbyists, corporatists, politicians, central bankers, globalists, all of that, that are trying to take us down a dark road of social credit scores, communism, not even just socialism, communism, total control of the people, a world like Minority Report. Like, we do not want to live in that reality, and a lot of people either think the Bible predicts that we're going to end up there, so we throw up our hands and play the victim and we just go there, or they couldn't actually want us to live there. That's not what these people really think. Nobody could really be like that. But I would hope that after watching mandatory things that they've done over the last 5 years to us, that there'd be a wake up call to go, no, there are people who really want to control the hell out of everybody and do this kind of stuff to us. So then we have a third option. Either we play the victim and say it's God's will and we just give up and let them do their evil, or we avoid that it couldn't even be possible that there are people like this. Or there's the third option of, we recognize we are at war with something. And there are people who are under the control and influence mentally, emotionally, spiritually of things that are dark for the future of humanity. And we are in a war, and we need not just a good president, not just a guy who we agree with some of his policies or whatever, but we need a general. We need a wartime general who's literally going to go in and destroy the system of evil and darkness that's put into place for us to move forward. That's where I'm coming from. I know that that's hard for some people to wrap their mind around, but if you actually grasp the larger picture, there's letters in the Library of Congress with Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, where Thomas Jefferson is writing to him saying, don't listen to certain things from Hamilton. Don't listen to these people or the other people, because they're influenced by the Illuminati. And he says it like, nowadays we think of it like, oh, if you believe in the Illuminati, you're wearing the tinfoil hat, and it's not real or whatever. It's been real for hundreds and hundreds of years, since secret societies that are controlling things to the best of their ability. And I believe we are technologically so advanced that we're either going to go into a brutal system of control over our fellow humans, or we're going to turn back to personal responsibility and freedom and law and order. See, the thing in our country that we forget, we are not a democracy. Every time I hear somebody say that, I know immediately they do not understand our government. Especially, this is a common dog whistle on the left to say, like, so and so is going to remove our democracy. We don't have a democracy. A democracy is, let's say you are being chased in the Old West. You're on a horse, you're being chased by a mob from the town, and they finally catch you and they drag you out and they say, we saw you rob old man Steve at the local general store. And you say, I've never even been in that general store. I don't know anything about it. But 51% of the mob says, yes, you did. And they string you up and hang you right there and you're dead. That's democracy. Democracy is majority rules. We live in a republic. In a republic, the mob catches up with you. They bring you to the sheriff. The sheriff says, okay, we're going to bring you before the judge. We're going to have a trial. We're going to listen to witnesses, and we're going to let the law decide. See, that's law and order. So when you hear certain leaders talk about law and order a lot, that's because they represent a republic. And that is a lot safer as a human being to live inside of a republic, where the law is actually going to keep you safe and you have a system of justice for all, rather than a system of majority mob rule. And so thankfully, we live inside a republic, but we have to actually get back to being a republic, because we've moved so far in one direction towards socialism, a democracy version of majority rule, and now moving further toward control into communism. And this has got to turn back. So we're at a fork in the road. I'm not going to say we're absolutely going to move in the direction of freedom and justice and wonderful kingdom advancing. That's where I believe we're going. That's where I want us to go. That's where God wants us to go as a humanity. But there's also forces that want us to go this direction of control and manipulation and systems of total control. And so we've been at this war for hundreds of years, but I believe it's come to the surface. It's getting so much light and attention, and we have an opportunity to go in a direction that people can take personal responsibility. People can live in freedom. People can live in. I mean, we had a president a few years ago that every time one new regulation would be put in, 10 regulations had to be removed. See, we need this stripping down to take place, the removal of this abusive level of government. The whole reason we put the Constitution in place was to restrain the government from becoming what it has currently become.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's time to actually detox and pull this system back to a healthy level. We need government. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not coming from that space, but it has a very limited role inside of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Romans 13 talks about it's for putting down evildoers. And in my mind, evildoer is not somebody who goes 5 miles over the speeding limit. It's somebody who is literally doing breaking into your house and stealing things that actually belong to you. That's an evildoer. When somebody is threatening, endangering your life, endangering your welfare, endangering your things that you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into for your life and your family, that's where the government steps in to bring justice. And so I know I talked a lot about government, but there's a lot of people just talking about the church side, where the church needs to go. And I get that. I just do not hear Christians having any understanding of the government. And if they have any understanding, it's usually coming from a fear-based place of how awful it's been. I honestly, my personal opinion is that we are about to see a government be put into place that will take us back 200 years in a positive direction toward less laws, more freedom, more personal responsibility, and fix our monetary system, fix our currency, get out of the Federal Reserve, and shift everything in this country so dramatically that 2025 is going to be an absolute. That's where I see us.
Okay, cool. Oh, that feels good. But I'm going to focus on a bit of the gap between where we are now and it ending hopefully in a very good place. And I know we're rounding the corner here towards the end. So I'm going to just highlight this piece that I hear you saying of personal responsibility. So you mentioned, you know what, we're at a fork. We're not guaranteed to go this better freedom path. That's where we hope we go.
Mhm.
But there is this moment in time that we're sitting in where it could go a dark way, and we're in a trepidatious period. And some of these things that you're talking about that require responsibility. So you're mentioning some really big concepts, from what's going on in the government, the type of government we actually have, central banking. These are things that probably the average person hasn't spent the time going down those rabbit holes, challenging those thoughts and belief. It takes time, it takes energy. So what's happening, and I'm going to come full circle here in a second, but what's happening is the year 2024, it's not just you. A lot of people are saying, we haven't seen a lot yet. It can get a lot worse, and it's likely going to. When these things get worse, those are kind of those wake up moments. Those are kind of those wake up opportunities. And I'm going to pull it back to the body for a second. It is not really the norm to go about your life, if you're healthy and free, to research why everybody's getting cancer. But once you get cancer out of the blue, or once your kid gets diagnosed with something weird, once like you're only 40 and your body's completely breaking down, then there's this motivation to be like, okay, wait a minute, why? We start looking at things like diet, we start looking at our environment, and suddenly it doesn't feel so conspiracy oriented. It's affecting you now. This wake up call has happened, and all of this effort is appropriate now, because you're forced to, essentially. You can either accept almost a death sentence or a very uncomfortable life, or you can try and figure it out. So you do. So 2024 could be filled with a lot of moments where that pain hits us, those wake-up calls hit us, or somebody we love, and suddenly it's worth it to put the time and the effort into understanding the complexity of these issues. So you're talking from a place where you've clearly already done some research. You've already looked into it. So you can just rattle off, well, central bank is behind this, and this kind of government we have, and like this is where responsibility lies. But a lot of people aren't even in that spot of understanding their personal responsibility because they don't understand what's actually happening in all these pieces that we talked about. It's hard to understand where your personal responsibility is if you're not even aware of what kind of government we have, right? So there takes this effort. I'm rounding to my point here. I really liked one of the pieces you said about, both the Bible and our government originally supposed to be about putting out evildoers.
Yeah.
What I suspect is coming, according to what you said, is probably another round of evil. And as the regular human going about their day, wanting to believe generally government is good, people are good, everything is fine, this level of evil might be shocking. And that shock is what generally wakes us up to say, okay, it's already here, gotta face it, gotta figure this out. Suddenly the story becomes really important. Suddenly these details about what does the Bible actually say becomes really important. What kind of government we have becomes really important. So as people come through this year, and let's say there is going to be some evil that shows its head at a new level. It could be very shocking. It might be worse than just someone breaking into your house. It could be some really dark stuff. So there's this gap between evil showing its head, waking up, and personal responsibility. What would you say to the person going through that as they try and move towards personal responsibility, that kind of waking up process of being faced with evil, being faced with maybe a dark year, maybe multiple years? What would you say to that person to get to personal responsibility?
I think one of the best pictures we have of it in the last couple decades is the movie The Matrix. It does just such a brilliant, the first one really encapsulates this brilliant picture of the character Neo thinks this is what the world is. He works in a cubicle in a little office setting. He's getting some glimpses that there's something else out there. He's getting these little messages through his computer and he's just barely grasps it. And then he gets the call. He gets the call from Morpheus. It's the wake-up call, and he starts to understand. And these agents come in and they try to capture him. And without going through the whole story, essentially, when he gets pulled out of the Matrix system and realizes that 200 years ago the robots took over and they're farming human beings, and your whole life of what you think your life is all just happening in your head. And your body is a battery that's actually being used by the future robots controlling and farming all the humans. Matrix or Neo, in that moment, he falls out of his chair and he vomits on the floor. And he can't handle the level of crazy information he just received. That's either where people have been in the last few years or where they're about to be with the information that's coming. And we're at the tip of the iceberg hearing about things like Jeffrey Epstein and his pedophile island and the involvement of the Clintons and the involvement of other major leaders. P. Diddy just this last week and all that's breaking out in the rap industry, Balenciaga a few years ago. Like there's so much of this. The Sound of Freedom movie, which helped bring some awareness to America, but there's a second sequel coming out this coming summer, which will help us see about Haiti. And there's so much that's coming out, and people are going to be popping like Neo in the Matrix. And now there's two parts to your question, because there's also the part of what can they do to be responsible? And that's a piece too. And so if people start to understand and grasp the big picture of where we're at, there's the personal responsibility of taking care of you and your family. And I think what's really important inside of that is one, figuring out and getting your head on straight for voting, because it's important. It really, really is. It's one of the very few things in this country that gives every individual power to help determine what that future is and where we're going. And America, I know we're going to have people listening to the podcast go, well, I'm not in America, whatever. But America sets the standard. I mean, we watched it during the lockdowns. Australia had prison camps for people who wouldn't take the shot. And it was when America turned the corner and started breaking the mandates because of good judges, and those judges overturning it, that then Europe came back to freedom and Australia eventually came back to freedom. Their Supreme Court in Australia just ruled last week that their lockdowns were illegal and abusive and authoritarian. So Australia is finally waking up. So we see that, and so America sets the standard of where the rest of the world goes, because our Constitution is so unique and it protects the rights of the people. And not that we have privileges, but that we have rights from birth by our Creator. That's what's so unique about it. So we are the example. If we don't go the right direction, the whole planet doesn't go the right direction. And I don't believe that's overstating it at all.
Right.
So that's one, is we have to be involved to vote like that. Second is taking care of what you need to get through 2024. And I'm not speaking as a financial advisor here at all, but I would tell anybody who is willing to listen to me, buy physical gold, buy physical silver, buy crypto. I'm not going to say necessarily Bitcoin, maybe it's Ethereum, maybe it's something else. But these systems are the things that destroy the central bank. And when the stock market collapses, when the central bank system collapses, these are the things that will be stable and solid. And I strongly recommend those, not with any hesitation. And people don't realize currently where we're really at. 2008, there was about $365 billion that was wiped out in the stock market crash of the real estate bubble. 365. As of a few months ago, I haven't looked at this number recently, but we've already in 2023 lost almost 500 billion in the economy through the different banks that collapsed last year. We're already in a worse state than 2008, 2009. People don't recognize it. We are already in a recession. We're actually headed, if things continue, into one of the greatest crashes and the greater depression than the Great Depression in 1929. This is where we're headed this year. And possibly war with Russia. People are talking about nuclear war. I would say gold, silver, Bitcoin, have a gun, be able to protect your home, get the food that you need. Don't buy the 55-gallon barrels of food like people did for Y2K, but whatever food you normally eat, get more of it and have it on hand. There's a value to being prepared ahead. If it's non-perishable, load some shelves in your garage. Think ahead. We've watched this year, in the last 12 months alone, we've watched the Lahaina wildfires. We've watched Israel be suddenly invaded by Hamas. We've watched tragedy after tragedy. And if we're still sitting around going, I don't know if I need a gun. We have over 15 million illegal immigrants that have just walked into the country. We have people like Lake and Riley getting killed like a week and a half ago. Just beautiful 22-year-old nursing student, doesn't know this person, just raped and killed at her college campus. Like, this craziness of what we're headed into, you need to be able to protect yourself. You need to be able to protect your family and your resources that you need to have on hand.
Yeah.
I think it was last week, I think, that the phones all went out for 4 hours. But people go, oh well, glitch, and we just move on. But what if it's 4 days or 2 weeks? What kind of things happen? And it's shocking how much of a la-la land most people are still living in. I never hear pastors talking about this unless they're paranoid and think we're about to go into the end times. Those are the pastors who are saying, buy food, buy guns, buy gold. And it's like, where's the kingdom advancing ones who are saying, be responsible and have what you need? You should have these things anyway.
Mhm.
So that's my practical advice of where I wish that people were paying attention. And if I go back, I wrote my book Raptureless about 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem in advance of the 2012 fear around the Mayan calendar. And there's in there, I gave the prediction. I said, if we are moving into the end times, I'm not looking to stock up on currency. I'm looking to stock up toilet paper. That will be the new currency. And it was hilarious as we were going through 2020, people texting me screenshots of that chapter, like, you nailed it, bro. So I've been right a couple times, I'll say.
That's good. That's good. Okay, very practical feedback on how to take responsibility, a really clear understanding of what could be next and how to prepare for that. I like that. I know we're getting close to the end here, so I'm gonna pause and let's switch gears just real quick. And let's get some feedback from you on top suggestions on books. So I'm going to break this down though, because what you just walked us through, and I really like this, the way you came about it. It's different than how I approach it, but I would say you came about this from a very masculine perspective. So in the blog and my book, I talk a lot about the difference between masculine and feminine, the energies, not necessarily the people or the genders, and how important the integration of those two are. Now, in the blog and in the work I do, I focus a lot on the inner world, which is a lot more feminine. But what you just focused on is a lot of the structure, the information, the history, the practical approaches, how to think, how to plan, how to really start to dissect this and approach it. And I really enjoy that. And it creates this structure for the feminine approach to thrive, essentially. So the feminine approach, I consider a little bit more inner world. That's how we're taking care of our soul. It's how to face pain. It's how to deal with resistance. Because all of the things that you're talking about do require a maturation of the inner world. So as we wake up, how to handle that pain in a responsible way, how to push through and accept different perspectives, how to change our mind, how to deal with the things that we're seeing and learning in a way that does lead to some of the really healthy masculine principles that you mentioned. So the two go together beautifully. And I really enjoyed hearing such a structured masculine approach to the story and to the practicalities of moving forward. So now we're kind of going into what I call a hybrid. So when we go into, say, books or anything that we're learning about, I think those usually span both ends. It kind of can put you in some of this feminine process of exploration, of learning, of intuition, and it can also sometimes be extremely practical. It's a tool. It's a way to educate yourself. I absolutely love books. I think anybody who can spend time listening or reading can really open up their world. And I think anybody who has anything close to answers or help or feedback right now has invested quite a bit of time in study. Not that books are salvation, but it is a process of how we can really open ourselves up and even entertain things that we don't agree with. There is such value in even, learning how to really do more than a 30-second Instagram click or a 10-second TikTok to have your ideas challenged, but really go into something, really sit with an idea and hear the full development of it. And I think books are the ideal. So that said, I'm going to ask you two different book questions based on everything you just walked us through. So really topic oriented on what we went over today. Top book recommendation. For anybody wanting to learn more, it could be anything. Where would you suggest listeners go deeper in a book?
If they want to understand some of the history background to some of what I shared, I would say this book right here is fantastic. I'll read the title, is The Suppressed History of American Banking: How Big Banks Fought Jackson, Killed Lincoln, and Caused the Civil War.
Awesome. I'll put a link to that.
Yeah, it's a really reader friendly. It's not an overwhelming history, but it's jam-packed, stunning information about what's been going on behind the scenes and to really understand the situation we've gotten ourselves into today.
Cool.
Yeah, that would be as far as the history. I would also especially people are, let's say they're challenged. If we go all the way back to the beginning where we're talking about covenants
Mhm.
versus some of these other things, I would strongly recommend getting a copy of my book, Understanding the Whole Bible.
Yeah.
And I take people back through those covenants and understanding them, and how uh, the destruction of Jerusalem is connected to the removal of the Moses covenant and brought us into the full freedom of the new covenant, because most people still blend those together. And that
Mm.
was actually the war that Paul was having the whole time he's writing the New Testament, was his war between those who were mixing the old and the new together. They were called Judaizers,
Mhm.
and he was basically fighting them in every letter. So
Right.
it's, but we still have that war today because people don't understand covenants, and it's really vital.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that too. That is actually one of my favorite books by you. I've gifted it to several people. It's
Hmm.
for anybody interested. I think it's a really great breakdown of a coherent worldview. I think it really walks you step by step how to see, question, understand. It felt very, I like to use the term neutral. Like it just felt like, here's the information. Let me walk you through it. Take what you want type thing. So it didn't feel super biased or anything that sometimes these books can feel like. I super enjoyed it. I thought it was one of the most helpful books I've read in the Christian-Judeo realm. Another one I would suggest for people by you is Raptureless. And I said it's
Yeah.
much more punchy, challenging, or really gets to like some part of some cultural stuff that we're all seeped in. So that's a fun one for anybody with more questions about that. Okay,
Yeah.
now I'm going to break from that for a sec and just go big. I mean, any topic, anything, the whole life and world of Jonathan Welton at this moment in time, top book review. It could be anything you're super interested in reading, or just like, hey guys, this is an incredible book. Check it out.
Gosh, that is a fun question. I think, based on what you were talking about a few moments ago about masculine and feminine,
Mhm.
I think that's such an important topic across the board, because, um, and Jordan Peterson has done a great job talking about this. That all throughout ancient cultures and around the globe, we have the feminine, which brings a dance and chaos and beauty and emotion. We have the masculine that brings structure and safety and peace. And you have these two things that are so different, and they come together. And Teal Swan talks about masculine containment, not that the masculine controls the feminine, but it creates a space for the feminine to be feminine. So I've been on this journey myself. This year we're celebrating 20 years of being married, my wife and I. And
Congratulations.
thank you. It was really rough at certain points, and we went through hell and back. In the process, it was masculine and feminine understanding that made all the difference.
Mhm.
So there's really two books in this realm. One that I wrote, and one that I also highly recommend.
Mhm.
One that I recommend is called The Way of the Superior Man.
Cool.
The Way of the Superior Man by Deida is like the classic. It is probably the best men's book, in a general sense, that I've ever come across. And The Way of the Superior Man, he he lays out what is the masculine, what is the feminine, and that there's even different levels. Like, you have the masculine man who is like the caveman, machoism, clubs you over the head, drags you back to his cave. He's just thuggish masculinity, machoism. Then you have second stage man, second level man, which is kind of the more new agey. He's in touch with his feminine. He talks about his feelings, and he's vulnerable, and he basically can be just as feminine as his woman, and that can create all of its own conflict,
Mhm.
because it lacks true stable masculinity. And then there's the third way, and he calls it the superior man, and it's the third level of masculinity that is strong and present and connected, not controlling, but provides safety. That this kind of masculinity. Now, I read that book like a dozen times as I was trying to step into that, become that, desired that. Couldn't actually get there because the book didn't tell me how to deal with the triggers that
Mhm.
kept interrupting me being that superior man. So that's when I came across a program called the Bulletproof Husband. And that was a transformative experience for me to be involved in that program. And at the end of it, partnered with them to actually write their book called The Bulletproof Husband, based on their principles, based on their insights. I didn't create this material, but I got to steward writing it and giving it to the world. And I
Mm.
would say it's the step beyond the way of the superior man of how do you actually become that superior man. And it's incredibly practical. How do you actually become that? Which we see when men become that, it saves their marriage most of the time. So, as it did for me and many, many others that I know. So, it's those two books would really be the two I would love to see get out more and more to the world.
Awesome.
They are just powerful. So, The Way of the Superior Man and
Okay.
The Bulletproof Husband.
Yeah, I'll put those in the link for everybody to check out. That's super exciting. I didn't actually anticipate you going there for the big any book allowed suggestion, but that's super fascinating. The whole point of this blog, the podcast, the work I do, the book, it hinges on those same ideas, including the group work. I think group work is so powerful when it's done on the right principles, when it's done by the right kind of facilitator, and bridging that gap between all of this information we have. Like you said, there's this great book about how to be the superior man, how to be the superior human, how to achieve all of these things. We've got so much information, but there's this almost like this gap between, well, how do you deal with the inner world in a way that actually lets you get there? And I use inner world very broadly because I do believe that there's a wide variety of ways to get through that gap and to do it in a way that's right for each individual. So anyways, beautiful last words from you about the books and how that all kind of ties in together. And I love it. Again, I saw your whole process being what I would call very masculine, but it ties together in this beautiful blend at the very end, at this kernel that you're talking about, this fusion of the right balance of feminine and masculinity that really sets it all on fire and makes it so real and full of life in the practical world. It's given new life to your books, to your ministry, to your marriage. So that was kind of a beautiful way to end our conversation together. Thank you for that.
Yeah, isn't it wild how, I mean, we talk politics, we talk theology, we went a lot of places, but I mean, at the end of it, you go back to the simple garden of Adam and Eve, and if you have the leader doing what he was supposed to be doing and protecting the garden against this talking serpent and this forbidden fruit, Eve could have been all that she was meant to be and free and enjoyed and created beauty and all of the everything. But he didn't do his job, take his responsibility seriously as a leader. He failed, and we have chaos ever since. And, the reality, we need good leadership in place, not just to have a good government or what a non-corrupt government, but that we could actually have families that thrive and safety in our nation and safety on our planet and bring heaven to earth, which I think embraces the feminine so much. I mean, get to the book, end of the book of Revelation, and it talked about the new heaven as a new Jerusalem, as a bride coming down from heaven. So I think that when heaven comes into earth, it brings a lot of feminine beauty with it. But we have to have the right masculine, healthy, responsible container to bring heaven to earth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that you're on the same track with that. So
Cool.
thank you for hosting this wild. I don't usually get the chance to share all of my historical background too, because it's important people get a hold of this. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very well spoken. It's funny. I feel like I could just pull a topic out of a hat and be like, what about this? And you'd be like, well, in 1718 is when the zoos first started. And you would have the whole history on that too. You can just kind of go anywhere with, you're very well read. I know that studying and, knowing your stuff is what you've committed your life to. And that's why it's so enjoyable to talk to people like you when you share your knowledge with us and give us your perspective. So thank you. I had a great time picking your brain, taking you all over the board. You're a great sport. I really appreciate you giving us your heartfelt answers to these big questions.
Gladly. A pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Yay. End scene. Very good.
When you have auto glass damage, trust SafeLight. And one easy appointment.
All right. Well, that was awesome. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that ministered to you and that was impactful to you like it was for me. And again, next week we'll be live again with episode 11 of Understanding the Times. It'll be live at 9:30 p.m. right here on YouTube as well as Facebook. And I'm hoping to get our Rumble stream set up by then as well. But I hope that was enjoyable. Sorry, I'm standing up here and my desk is rocking. But again, thanks for watching. Share this, like this, ask questions. If you have comments, feel free. Oh, let me share this. Let's see here. This is where did it go? Processing. Yeah, let me add this to the screen. This is Jessica's YouTube page, YouTube channel, Alice in No Man's Land. Right now, she's only got a few subscribers, but I know that's going to jump tremendously. And I can't recommend enough that you go out there and subscribe to her video cast. She has some really, really great content. You can check out her page on YouTube. And then also you can find Dr. Jonathan Welton at several different places on Facebook, YouTube, all over the place. Just search for Jonathan Welton. You'll see all his stuff out there. He's got some amazing stuff. So again, if you haven't yet, check out this book, Understanding the Whole Bible. And that's the key, is not just taking little snippets out of context, but actually understanding the whole Bible. He does an amazing job going through covenants that you've been talking about. And it was really impactful to me, and I believe it will be to you as well. So next week, we'll be jumping back into his book, Raptureless, and talking a lot about what's going on, or maybe what's not going on. With biblical prophecy and the end times, eschatology, all that good stuff. We'll be jumping back into that discussion, and I'm sure it's going to be awesome. But until then, have an awesome week. Thanks for watching, and it's always a privilege to be with you here. You guys have an amazing, amazing week, and we will see you